This is video 34. The title is Johannesburg. It's about a trip I took a number of years ago with some friends of mine to go down there and do some work. It's not a real short story, but hope you like it. One day I received a phone call about going to Johannesburg, South Africa, to get a diaper line running. There would be 4 of us going: Bill from Cape, Mario from Modesto, Cecil from Sheboygan, and me from Mahupani. The 4 of us had all worked on rollout of P&G's global diaper lines. We all knew each other to some extent. I had worked with Bill, who was a program tech on 3 projects with me in Cincinnati. He developed job aids, which were step-by-step instructions on how to do all the various tasks involved with the equipment. An example would be changing flex knives and setting up the proper deflection. I worked with Cecil doing static and dynamic PSI at the equipment manufacturer in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Static PSI, or pre-start inspection, is where you take the engineering prints of the machinery and go over all the equipment, making sure that all the drive pulleys are correct with the right number of teeth and the width. All the gearboxes are properly filled with oil, all the belts and pulleys are properly aligned, etc. Dynamic PSI is dry running the equipment, starting at a low speed, and a visual walk-around inspection is done, observing all the machinery, looking for belt chafing, misalignments that didn't show up in static PSI, leaks, etc. Next is full run at top design speed. At full run for a designated length of time, temperature checks would be made of all the bearings and gearboxes to make sure everything was capable of running at design. I met Mario at Sheboygan when he was working on a completely different project. His machine had a glue applicator that we were getting, and I needed some pictures of it. He was doing an efficiency run. The machine went down just as I approached him about pictures. He said I had 3 minutes to get what I needed, because that was the time it would take to get the machine running again. I think a splice was missed and some rethread had to be done. That was the only time I'd been around Mario before this trip. The headhunter that was getting us together set up a conference call so we could discuss the job. There were 4 guys who got together and acquired financing to purchase the recently closed P&G household products plant in Kempton Park. Kempton Park was a small town just outside of Johannesburg, surrounded by an industrial park of manufacturing plants. The 4 partners also purchased a diaper line from the plant in Spain and moved it to Kempton Park. It was running, but their best days were around 20% efficiency. Not good. The deal for us was as follows. We would go to the plant with the goal of getting all 4 teams to run at or above 70% efficiency. Our pay was $500 per day plus $50 per diem. If the goal for all 4 teams was not met, we didn't get paid. How's that for do or die? We kicked it around a little, and I asked, "Hey guys, when will we ever get a free trip to South Africa again?" That did it. Everybody agreed that we would give it a shot. The travel day was extremely long. I had to get on 2 planes just to meet the guys in Detroit. Not having seen Mario and Cecil for a few years, I'd hoped I'd recognize them. I got off the plane in Detroit and walked through the really neat tunnel with the crazy trippy lights. Now I'm wondering, how am I going to find the guys? Just outside the tunnel was a barbecue place. I was ready for some lunch, so I went in. There was a familiar face. I said, "Mario?" He looked up and said, "No, Don, it's Cecil. Mario's in the men's room." So just like that, we were together. Bill had something going on and would fly down separately the next day. We flew on a 777 Airbus to Amsterdam. That took 8.5 hours. We got off at Gate 5 and immediately got on a British Airways 747 at Gate 8. Then we flew straight south to Johannesburg. That was another 10.5 hours. We flew economy class. Talk about cramped up. You couldn't walk around either. Business class would have been much better, but an economy class ticket was $4,000 and business class was $10,000. We arrived at night and went through customs and got picked up by a lady with the Volkswagen van. It needed shocks for sure. We stayed at a really nice place called the Manor. It was a brick-walled compound and a nice hotel with only about a dozen rooms at most. It was gated too. It was a first-class place. Nice rooms, dining room, and bar. There was a large pavilion with a thatched roof. They had a kidney-shaped swimming pool with a bridge over it. Their main income was from weddings. They would have 2 and sometimes 3 each weekend we were there. Linda and Tony, the owners, were great folks. The employees were great too. We had some good times with them. Outside the compound was a different story. It looked like Vietnam. The unemployment rate at that time was around 40%. We left the week before the third national election since the elimination of apartheid. They had 32 political parties at that time, everyone promising the moon. The first thing Tony told us when we arrived was to not take a taxi anywhere. We would never be seen or heard from again. My first morning, the sun was shining brightly through the gold curtains on my window. I walked over and opened the curtains and almost crapped my drawers. There was a 747 about a half mile out coming straight at me. Oh boy, halfway around the world just to die in a plane crash. That night we were tired and not really oriented. The Manor was about a mile across the interstate, if you will, from the airport, and a runway approach brought planes right over us. Of course, South Africa was a British colony for a long time before they gained independence from England. Everything is done the British way. Everything was left-handed. They drove on the left, walked halls and stairways on the left. It got me to wondering if when the USA was being established, if there was not a directive somewhere for everything to be made opposite Europe. We went to work. It was about a 15-20 minute drive. We met with our benefactors, and then the 4 of us sat down with all the engineering prints for the diaper line. This was a commercial off-the-shelf line, not a special P&G line. After studying the prints, we came up with a plan dividing the equipment into 4 areas. Mine was final fold through the stacker, bagger, and case packing. We requested some line downtime to do a static PSI. After a thorough inspection, we found just one bad bearing on our jack shaft. Other than that, the line was in fine shape. So now it was time to start up and observe how the teams functioned. We each stayed in our areas to help and coach if necessary. It turned out that too many people were making adjustments. The operator had a vision screen that displayed pictures of each diaper in real time. It was so fast that it looked just like a movie. We were all used to that system. If the operator saw something like the front ears of the core were too short and the back ears were now too long, he would make an adjustment to retard the laydown drum, slightly changing the relationship of the core to the first knife and bringing the front and back ears in line with specs. If the pack area person and or the quality person made sample checks about the same time, the proper adjustment would be made 2 or 3 times. This threw the defect totally the other way. The line was over 120 feet long and the laydown drum was at the far end. When that adjustment was made, you had to give it time to get through the entire line before checking again. Timing was a main problem. Push the button, check. Push the button, check, without giving time for the change to get to your station. Communication was a challenge to a certain extent. There were other teams there from other countries for support to get the line running. There were Turks, Saudis, Germans, and us. I actually knew Rene on the German crew. I had him in a global rollout class at Cape. I got some good insight as to what was what from him. One thing that we weren't told, that did not sit too well, was our designation was SWAT team. We were in charge. Being in charge was okay, but the SWAT part was a bit much. Also, after 2 weeks, we had a meeting where we were to evaluate the local people we were working with who would eventually take over the operation. That too was a surprise. We were not comfortable with that either. There were folks with resumes saying they were school-trained electricians. Well, that was true, but they were trained in breaker boxes and how to wire a house. None had a clue about ladder instructions, PLC IOs, proximity and limit switches, let alone fiber optics, light and dark operation, resolvers, etc. After a week or so, at one of our group meetings, we concluded that a team building exercise was needed. We had hope of getting more cooperation between the line and the quality folks and cut down on over-adjusting. Also, a pad reading class would also help. That would give them a better understanding as to what happens when certain adjustments are made and their effects on the other parts of the product. I had my archives, which included a pad reading class. It was a different product than the one they were running. So at night at the hotel, I worked and changed the drawings to match their product drawings and adjusted the presentation accordingly. Since I was the trainer in the group, I facilitated the proceedings as we each gave our observations and recommendations for each area. The teams were mostly receptive to their input. Then I gave the pad reading class. Things improved right away. The online cooperation in regard to adjustments and communications about various things was obvious. We started having some good runs. We got along with everybody, except one guy from Saudi Arabia. There were two, Osama and Mohammed. Osama was a nice kid, but he wanted to learn everything all at once. I'd be explaining something to him, and if I looked away for a second, he'd be gone somewhere else. I was willing to teach him, but you got to stand still. I told him that a couple of times. Now, his fellow Saudi was a pain in the butt. He did not like being told what to do by Americans. He actually said, "We ran 70% before the Americans got here." That was true. They did have one day of 70%, but he neglected to say they spent the next 3 days throwing it away. One day the line went down. A flow valve had snapped off an air cylinder on the stacker. I sent my trainee to the storeroom for a new nipple that was threaded on both ends. One end into the valve and the other into the cylinder. The threads in the cylinder broke off. Now there are warning horn buttons in 3 or 4 areas on the line. If there was a disruption in one part of the line, folks responsible in other areas would do process cleanup, etc. in their area. The person working the problem would push the horn button just a few times before finishing up to let the rest of the line know they needed to get ready to start up. Now I had to remove the threads from the end block on the air cylinder using a screwdriver for an easy out. That was fine. But in order to reinstall the flow valve, I had to unhook the air line. Then screw the nipple into the flow valve, and then turning the flow valve to screw the other end of the nipple into the air cylinder block. Once installed, I needed to reattach the air line to the flow valve. It would take about 15 minutes total. Mohammed was farther down the line doing something. I had hardly got the broken threads out when he starts blowing the horn. I looked at him and motioned to him that it would be a few minutes. He blew that horn 4 or 5 more times while I was trying to quickly get my work done. About the 4th time, I remember slamming the wrench down and I started heading for that little asshole. Our boss, who was one of our real electricians, jumped up and grabbed me. "Don't kill him, Don. I just disabled the horn." I went back to the stacker and finished up. I had another run-in with that little turd the day before we left. I couldn't fit under the stacker. The clutch brake needed a new rubber spider coupling insert. It was a 20-minute job. Guess who was the only one small enough to get in there? I argued with that clown for 3 hours to get him to change it properly. He was even going to saw off a gearbox shaft. Well, it finally got changed, only to find out from Ramon, our other electrician from Spain, that the spider had to be replaced the next day again. I watched Muhammad. It looked like he was tightening the bolts properly, but he was not. Everything came loose the next day and ate up the coupling. We did take a couple afternoons off. One afternoon we went to the mint where they make the Cougarans. Solid gold money. A full Cougaran was worth $1,000 at the time. You could buy proofs in the gift shop for $1,500. That was a little steep for me. I bought a 1/10 of a Cougaran for $150. The money is officially now designated only as Rand. We also went to an outdoor mall. I had to purchase another suitcase to hold the stuff I bought to bring home. Here's the scary part of the trip. While heading back to the hotel, we were approaching the Kempton Park Square roundabout. We were in the left lane of a double lane one-way and about 10 cars from the roundabout. All at once, this guy comes from the right out ahead of us and turns right into our lanes, going the wrong way. Right behind him was a Volkswagen Rabbit police car. This guy was coming no matter what. Everybody was trying to get out of the way by pulling diagonally to the side. The police were about 3 car lengths behind. A police officer was half out of the car, sitting in the window opening. The bad guys are right next to us. I could have reached out and smacked them. Next, I see the cop pull out what looked like a .45 caliber handgun, and he started shooting at the guy who was right next to me. The cops got them about 4 or 5 cars past us, pulled them out and beat the crap out of them. Wow. Later, playing it back in my mind, I realized that not only was the cop hanging out the window shooting at the bad guys, but since the cars are left-handed, he was driving too. All I could say is, wow. Well, we did get paid. One team reached 80%, 2 85%, and 1 88%. I came home and went to Cabela's and bought a 16-foot john boat so I could take my dad fishing. He got out twice before his stroke. Well, that's a good summary of our trip to Johannesburg. All the best to everyone. Thank you.